Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Chicago Justice Show. Thank you so much for tuning in. Um, we have a great show for you today. My name is Tracy Siska. I'm Executive Director of the Chicago Justice Project and your host for the show. If you want to learn more about us, you'll see on the scroll links to our website. You can also support us through Patreon. This is a special time for this coming week, but starting March 1st, we're going to be at this time 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, streaming at 5:30 Central. And we're going to try, the Monday shows will be on the media. Wednesday show, we're going to do interview shows that are strictly focused on justice issues in Chicago. And then Friday show is going to be more focused on national issues around crime, justice, violence, police accountability, transparency, all those wonderful issues. Real quick before we get into today's show, I want to talk to you about the next 2 interview shows, which for this week and next week air at 12 to 1 Central Time. This coming week, we have Eddie Bocanegra from Ready, Chicago, and Vaughn Bryan from MP4P. We're going to talk about a pledge they took with Chicago Creed, they pledged and they set goals to reduce gun violence in Chicago by 20% a year that had been going down pretty steadily up until 2020. And obviously we've had a bit of a spike in all those issues, but I'm sure Eddie and Vaughn, I'm going to speak for them a little bit and saying they're going to tell you community distress, housing distress, distress around housing, health, all of that has contributed to what's going on in Chicago this year. So we're going to talk to them. There's a possibility of us having a third guest from Chicago Creed. We'll see if that happens. The week of the 17th, we're honored to have with us Sarah Stout, pronouncing that right, who's a senior policy analyst and staff attorney from the Chicago Council of Lawyers. And we're talking about the large 800-page reform bill of criminal justice reform bill passed by the Illinois General Assembly, and why we're going to champion some of the things that came in that. It was not nearly enough. There was some wheeling and dealing at the end to take out some of those things. And we're going to talk definitely about how it is not the end of policing, and people aren't going to be running wild in the streets causing violence, and how those reforms are a good step, but more steps need to be taken. So let's celebrate what we got, but we got to work towards significantly increasing those reforms. And where CJP is very much for the Illinois General Assembly, the Cook County Board, and the Chicago City Council pushing those reforms. All right. So we're going to get into our first segment today, which is YouTube shows on the interview shows that are done by the Chicago Police Superintendent David Brown, called Real Talk with the Superintendent. It's on the Chicago Police Department's YouTube channel. And we go back to a November 2020 episode where the superintendent is interviewing acting Deputy Superintendent of Constitutional Policing and Reform, Robert Boyk, talking about reform, what is it, and about the CPD's reform. And I want to talk to you a little bit. I'm going to show a couple clips and talk to you. I'm going to show the first clip, then I'll come back, and then we'll show the second one after I discuss what's in the first one a little bit. But I want to translate what's in these clips because it certainly seems like it makes sense, but you'll realize what they're actually trying to tell you when I help decode it a little bit. So let's get to video clip 1.
Bob, talk about overall all the components of reform, kind of what it means for the layman and the public. And I know we are going to talk about training and community policing, but just kind of the overarching, what is reform?
So that question is really important because I think the way it has been spun externally is not accurate. You know, a lot of the articles that have been written have been about deadlines and whether we've met them or missed them. However,
so reform is not suspense items, deadlines,
reform
boxes checked. That's not reform.
No, sir. That is not reform. Reform is about sustainable improvement within the department over a long period of time.
Cultural change.
Cultural change. It doesn't mean that reform is going to take a long time. We've been engaged in the reform effort for many years now, and we're very much engaged today, but it's going to take a lot of effort on our part, on the part of our organization, to achieve that cultural change that you mentioned. It's something that keeps going and going. Now, that doesn't mean we're not going to meet the deadlines in the consent decree at some point, but what it does mean is once we've done that, we're not going to stop. We're going to keep going.
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack in there. What is reform? It's not about checking boxes. Well, of course, the Chicago Police Department is going to say that now because they've checked almost none of the boxes. For those that are catching up, a couple of years ago, a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, whatever that time frame was, the Chicago Police Department was put under a federal consent decree. It's basically a court-ordered agreement being overseen by a federal judge in the Northern District of Illinois, pushed by the Illinois Attorney General's office, Lisa Madigan, before she left office. And it's basically being overseen by a former state inspector general, if I remember her position, before she became the monitor of the agreement, and how the CPD was living up to it or not. They're way behind. Massively, massively behind. Now, in the midst of this, obviously, there's been a pandemic, civil unrest related to the effects of the pandemic, the effects of George Floyd's murder, and I mean, you can go on and on with all Eric Garner's murder. You can keep going on and on. Laquan McDonald's murder. So that was going to impact to some degree their ability to check the boxes. But the police department is so antiquated, so beyond having 21st century modern anything, that you can't possibly have any faith that this old school, what I would call broken in many ways police department it's kind of like they're saying, trust us. I know we agreed to this time frame and we agreed to check all these boxes and make all this progress by time, but we're not going to really live up to that. You can't imagine that's a reality. What we're going to do instead, though, is just trust us. You know, we're really for and engaged in cultural reform, and it's going to take a long time, even though we've been at it a long time. It won't take a long time, but we've been at it a long time, and it does take a long time, and it's not about checking the boxes. I mean, it's gibberish almost. The only way to have any faith in what they're doing regarding this reform and the consent decree is to check the boxes. This is not a department that the Deputy Inspector General for Public Safety has shown over and over and over in Chicago this summer, this year, with their audits and investigations released. They don't have a policy. They don't follow policies. They can't honestly, with any integrity across the board, respond to subpoenas. They fail in almost every aspect about releasing video in the 60-day policy for shootings and brutality that that Mayor Lightfoot private citizen, head of the police board, Lightfoot championed and Ron put into place, and it's just found out to be a horrific failure. I don't know. They haven't earned trust us. And the mere fact that the superintendent is allowing that to be said on YouTube while he's in the room, let alone engaged in the stage theater of interview where the superintendent, not everyone doesn't already know what the questions are said, and they haven't wordsmithed all the answers already. That's what's going on there. It's pure theater, nothing more. And it's kind of ridiculous. So let's get to clip 2.
So, Bob, reform touches all parts of the department. Can you expand on that thought?
Absolutely. We created an org chart where you have constitutional policing on one side and everything else on the other side. Right. But in reality, that's not the way it works.
That's right.
Reform is cross-cutting across everything we do. You mentioned cultural change, and that culture cuts across the organization. But it touches patrol in terms of number of supervisors we have, how we supervise, what are the roles and responsibilities of supervisors. It touches recruitment, hiring, and promotion. How do we attract diverse talent and bring them up through the ranks? It obviously touches training, and that touches every member of the department because we've gone from 0 hours to 40 hours next year. Every sworn member of the department has to go through that. So this is not just one side of the organization versus the other. The other thing I would add is reform is not done in a vacuum. It has to be connected to our overall department strategy. And ultimately, reform will help us be the police organization that we want to be. But it can't be done on its own in a room over here. It has to involve everybody within the department, and I think we're on our way to being able to do that.
Well, you certainly wouldn't know it from any of the reports from the monitor and her team about what you're doing because you're failing at all the markers. So that's one thing. They're not wrong that it touches everything. And this is the problem, though. And this is why I have no faith in Superintendent Brown being able to change the department through this process, is that this is the same thing with community policing. You can't have a team. You can't have a squad. That's not what this is, but it's still that way under Superintendent Brown. He's got this community, the summer community team that's also a saturation team, but somehow does projects with the community to, reform relations. I don't have any faith in Superintendent Brown or the Chicago Police Department really taking constitutional policing and living up to the consent decree as seriously as it would need to be to allow it to infiltrate and touch every part of the department. That's not what this department is about, has been about. Superintendent Brown certainly isn't about it. So while they're right, I just don't have any faith in anything they're trying to do that would infiltrate all the aspects of the department they would need it to be. And Superintendent Brown certainly hasn't shown me anything. Without revealing too much, we'll get into Superintendent Brown's history in Dallas and why he may not be as trustworthy as we were led to believe, both by the Chicago media and our current mayor when that process was going on. So we'll see. I don't have any faith. Either hit the deadlines. The police department needs to be told hit the deadlines or else. And this should be this acting deputy superintendent who's head of constitutional policing, both his job and the job of Superintendent Brown and all of his people at the deputy superintendent ranks, all their jobs should be on the line. Hit those marks or get out of the department. If you can't do it, you can't be there. That's period. End of discussion. We'll be monitoring it for you. So we're going to move on to our next segment, which is how SC Johnson has stepped forward to fund Alderman Beal's cop house, or what he's calling it as a cop house, which I guess is a house they're going to rehab and make it into a community policing location. Once again, a failure. But it's somehow going to take it outside of the department. And because you're putting one house in one police district, that is somehow going to really bring the community and police together. Alderman Beal has said he's been fighting with the mayor. This recent article that we flashed up on the screen is written by Fran Spielman. She gets two of our hits today. We're talking about two of her pieces in different segments. The next segment also is about a piece that Fran wrote, and it's really devoid of any context. So, I've been in aldermen's offices when Fran's called their cell phones or in meetings with them, and they just put it to voicemail because, to quote one alderman, she's just looking to make trouble. She's just looking for a salacious quote. And that's basically Fran's MO, and especially around these issues. Beal has talked about they're mimicking or trying to mimic a project in Racine, but you wouldn't know that because Fran doesn't know. She doesn't put up anything about how, any information about if that's what they're looking at. Well, what is this project in Wisconsin, in Racine, Wisconsin, and how did it go? Has it been independently evaluated? Did it work? Yes, of course, some of these things in the short term are going to make people feel like they're part of something and that the police department are trying something. So it may change opinions about the police a little bit over the short term, but it's about whether it holds up long term. it'd be nice if we could have that data about, what's going on. If this is a replication issue, what happened in Racine? Fran, make a call, do some research. That's really not her MO. Her MO is getting salacious quotes she can make a good headline out of. And honestly, I got to tell you a story quickly that when we were trying to pass police board reform, this is why Daley was in office still. We had basically more or less, we as me and the Chicago Justice Project and the Chicago Coalition for Police Accountability, were more or less working out a deal with Alderman Ike Carruthers. And I won't tell you the ward because I don't remember it exactly, and I don't want to give you the wrong ward. He was chairman of the Police and Fire Committee at the time. And at one of those meetings, I get a call from Alderman Fioretti during the city council meeting. I'm in the back in the audience. He's on the floor. You can't take calls. So I walk outside the chambers and take it. And he's asking me about a study we published on the police board. And I start telling him the findings. And he's like, no. Read it to me, dictate it to me like you're writing an article, because I'm sitting here with Fran Spielman and I'm just going to give it right to her, everything you say. And he did it. And I believe within a couple hours, an article appeared on the Sun-Times website. I was never called by Fran. I don't think she made any other calls. So, I mean, that just shows you why you get stories like this about this project in Racine that Beal is trying to replicate in his ward. I believe it's the 9th ward. Make a call, Fran. Let's figure out what the hell is going on in Racine and whether it is worth replicating. Just because he says he's replicating somewhere else, it doesn't mean it worked. And if he tells you it works, how do you know he's telling you the truth? How do you know he knows what the hell he's talking about? And so just to wrap this up in a little bow, you got to remember, people, these aldermen, when something happens, Anjanette Young, Laquan McDonald, there's always talk about doing things, and they so rarely ever get anything done. Alderman Beal is a prime example because about maybe 14 months, somewhere in that range, 15 months, Alderman Beal was chair of the Police and Fire Committee under Richard Daley before Ron came in for about 14, 15 months. And I can tell you, they did nothing on this issue, nothing around police accountability, zero. Beal's been on that committee, which is now called Public Safety, for a long time. Was he done? Nothing. We have the data we're publishing in the spring on 20 years of their activity. He's done nothing. This is what he does. And, in the Anjanette Young hearing the Public Safety Committee had, he's talking very seriously and strenuously about needing to get something done, and the city's counting on us. The people are counting us to do something. And that's great, Alderman, except for the fact that Alderman Beal wanted to outlaw no-knock warrants. We got to do something. And it's even after Superintendent Brown is like, I don't know what you're talking about. The warrant wasn't a no-knock warrant. You could outlaw them, but they're not going to make any difference in the case. It isn't going to stop what happened to Anjanette Young from happening again. Did that stop him? Nope. He kept pushing. Let's do this. Let's ban no-knock warrants. Even though, admittedly, it would have no impact. It's sad, but that's true. There's a couple quotes of Beal arguing or complaining about how Superintendent Brown isn't as visible as past superintendents, which is just really sad because I'm not sure what that means. I mean, don't you care whether or not crime is being fought, whether or not you care about that rather than whether or not the superintendent's there? What's better? More crime being prevented and the superintendent staying in the headquarters, or a superintendent being on the ground in your community, but crime being out of control? It's a ridiculous argument, but I mean, from the city council, for most of them, you don't expect anything less. And then Beal talks about how the institutional knowledge that left when Superintendent Brown came in. Police officials, especially senior police officials, leaving when a consent decree comes in federal investigation and then a consent decree is not a shock. You know why the feds are in? Because your department is not working. Many of your senior leaders are not doing their job, and they've just towed the company line forever. So them leaving, not a surprise. That is not Superintendent Brown's issues. If you wanted all the leaders to say, then what needed changing? When you need change, you bring in new leaders. That's how you get change. But don't tell Alderman Beal that. He complains about the institutional knowledge lost. It's kind of sad, really. If you want change in the department, the leaders got to be changed. That is just the way, especially old school CPD leaders. So we're going to go on to our next segment, another Fran Spielman article. Alderman terrified constituents demand answers to carjacking spike. And in this one, another not good article, another just getting salacious quotes, and I want to read a couple to you here. And this is we're going to criticize some aldermen here too. I've never seen us more united over an issue. Lincoln Park Alderman Michelle Smith, 43rd Ward. Congratulations, Alderman. And listen, carjackings, they're not good. No doubt about it. But you think you would have been equally united around finding solutions so that maybe murders like Laquan McDonald didn't happen again. Torture of John Burge, torturing suspects didn't happen again. I guess that's just not things they're united against. How about not selling the parking meters, not closing 50 schools, not closing the mental health clinics? These aldermen are oblivious to the fact that their decisions, their votes, which most of them voted for all of that, are causing the situation in the city, the circumstances, the social circumstances, the economic dire in a lot of these communities. Their votes are part of the reason they've created those circumstances, and they're oblivious and they take no responsibility. It's time that they do. Here's one from Alderman Burnett, 27th Ward, a strong daily ROM voter. You could always count on his yes when they needed it. Use my tax increment financing money to buy a helicopter, man. Do what you have to do. Listen, this is such a typical response from aldermen. Spend any money you have to, possibly. Do what you have to do. Spend as much money possible on the criminal justice system. Throw all the money you possibly can at it, but solve the problem. We don't care. Now, where was he when it was time to vote on selling the meters? Same thing with Alderman Smith. Where were they? Burnett's been around forever and a day. Where was he for all these things? He was lost. He was always a yes vote. Always a yes vote. Here's another one. Pat Dowell, 3rd Ward. I don't think we're going to solve this problem by having 66 people on Zoom meeting in a subject matter hearing. I really don't feel like there's any reasonable outcomes that are going to come out of this today. Okay, maybe, you know what? I don't think she's too wrong, but not doing anything. What did you want done? I don't feel that I've received any information. Here we go. Once again, politicians that vote on things that create the circumstances for issues around crime and violence in the city, taking no responsibility and passing the buck. I don't feel that I have received any information about what happened on the prosecution side. This is what my constituents are looking for answers to. They want to know that people are committing these crimes are being dealt with by the criminal justice system. Yep. Once again, don't look at us. Keep it in this narrow, I'm going to focus the camera for you, but where you should be looking for blame. It's Kim's Fox problem. It's not ours. It's not me for voting for meters. It's not me for closing mental health clinics, helping close the mental health, closing 50 schools in the most underserved communities in Chicago. By the way, the same place that you closed the schools, you closed the mental health clinics. Good job, Alderman. It's not for us being a yes vote for everything Rahm and Daley wanted just about. It's the criminal justice system's problem. It's their fault. We need political responsibility. We need politicians to take responsibility for what they vote on. This is something in the Chicago Justice Show we talked about on June 30th with Professor Barry Friedman from the Policing Project at NYU, and we're going to look at a clip of him and I talking about it.
I get frustrated, and I am frustrated, and I'm going to not be quiet about that frustration. We've had fatter times where we did have the resources. Mm-hmm. And Though I understand that there's tremendous anger toward the police right now, and I understand why there is that anger, and I'm not seeking to minimize it, though I think we should be sensible about it. There ought to be more anger at public officials who, responding to an electorate that wanted lower taxes and wanted to not be troubled with these social problems, just, even in fat times, left us without the resources to help people that needed help. And especially when I hear those public officials now pointing fingers at the police, I kind of want to say, where were you over the last 5, 10, 15, 20 years? The police didn't defund mental health services and homelessness and substance abuse and cut resources for, dealing with traffic issues and whatnot. It was public officials. And we ought to be able to cast that responsibility where it belongs.
I 100% agree with that. And I have been pushing long and hard for local officials to be held accountable for their financial lack of regulation or their financial, what they approve in local jurisdictions, especially in Chicago, because it's where we're concentrating right now. But there's an absolute correlation between some of the votes they've taken on financial issues, cutting taxes, defunding things, and the situation we now find ourselves in. And I think it's completely hypocritical for them to blame this all on the police, because some of them have been in 10, 15, 20 years, and they have a long history of votes on those issues that have significantly contributed to the situation we're in. The mayor didn't, in Chicago, for example, the mayor didn't defund mental health all by himself. He did not defund homelessness. He did not defund the schools all by himself. Those budgets were voted on, and I would love to see those political officials held to account and to take some ownership over what's been happening.
Me too.
Yeah, I mean, and this story is a great example. These are 1, 2, 3 aldermen. Burnett, for sure. I'm not sure exactly how long Michelle Smith has been in, but Burnett and Pat Dowell have been in many, many years. Both were around when we tried to pass police board reform in 2009 and 2010. So that's at least 12 years right there. You got to take responsibility for your vote. You can't create the circumstances that are so dire in these communities and then complain about the response from the public. It would be nice if they took some responsibility. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take 1 minute break and we'll be back with you in 1 minute.
Join a group of engaged and committed individuals advocating for transparency and accountability in the local justice system around the country. Get engaged through crowdsourced research projects, digital activism, public policy advocacy, or become a social media ambassador. Our criminal justice system will not reform itself. Communities must demand it. Transparency can be the fuel for justice our local communities need to combat the weaponizing of data by our justice system. Transformation of our justice system cannot occur until we know exactly what they are doing and who they are doing it to. Get involved today. CJP Nation.
All right, everyone, welcome back. Thank you so much for being with us. Our next segment is an article from Pascal Sabino from Black Club Chicago. West Side Violence Prevention Groups helping CPS design alternatives to cops in schools, a whole different way of them doing things. It's a pretty good article. And I'm going to say that what I find sad about this is that this isn't more of a citywide issue. This idea of community organizations coming together, finding ways to deal with and combat what's going on in schools and getting away from this police-only response. I remember years ago, Jonathan Peck from the Southwest Youth Collaborative in Marquette Park talked to me. He was on our advisory board for many years. And he talked to me about how, the police At that point, one of the district commanders, they operated in several districts, I believe, or maybe multiple district commanders, had come to SWIC, Southwest Youth Collaborative. I think that's what their name acronym was pronounced, but came to Southwest Youth Collaborative and were looking for ways to stop getting teachers to call the police on every single thing that happened. Disrespecting a teacher was grounds for the police being called. And when you now station cops in all these schools, that's a huge problem, right? And Mayor Lightfoot had an opportunity this summer in response to George Floyd, in response to the calls to defund police, to really come out and start a citywide dialogue on all of this. Getting cops out of schools, coming up with alternative response systems. And unfortunately, what's happened is more or less some of that is occurring, but it's occurring almost in the shadows instead of being in the light. Excuse me, it should not just be a few community organizations working behind closed doors. This should be a bigger, more community-based endeavor so that people know what's going on and can have some input in it and feel satisfied in the process. This is not what's happening. There is an alternative response prototype project, I believe, going on in one of the police districts. And I don't remember which one it is right off the top of my head, but it shouldn't be happening in secret. If we're going to go down these paths, it should be done in public. But you know, when you get politicians that are worried about getting reelected, this stuff always happens in the shadows. It's unfortunately the way it's done, and this is how it was done under Daley. This is how it's done under Rahm. This is how it's being done under Lightfoot. This is shadow politics at its best, and that's a sad thing. This may be a great idea that's involving Build Chicago in it, but we just need more sunshine about what's going on and who's involved and what is being proposed, and then prototyping it to see if it works. We don't need this stuff going on behind closed doors, but that's the way politicians in Chicago, and unfortunately Lightfoot is still infected by the political bug. I do think candidate Lightfoot would be upset with what some of the things Mayor Lightfoot is doing. Okay, our next segment is about a Mary Mitchell article, or column, I guess. It's not really an article. She's a columnist entitled Rash of Teen Carjacking Shows It's Time to Expand the Meaning of Neglect Abuse by Minors. Yeah, there's no doubt, it seems from the data anyways, that a lot of what's going on is actually, a lot of the things around carjackings is actually the youth doing it. And that's definitely a problem. But the biggest problem with her column is that once again, it's like the politicians, like Burnett and Dowell and Michelle Smith. It's about instead of empowering communities and finding resources for families to live in better circumstances and to have more resources on a whole variety of subjects to deal with drug addiction, mental health, the schools, building up and empowering their communities. What do we get? We get a call by Mary Mitchell to expand the power and reach of the state by increasing the reach of the Department of Children and Family Services. That's what you're talking about, right? When you increase or expand the definition of neglect and abuse, you're talking about DCFS, the Department of Children and Family Services, getting involved. And I am not sure if that's actually leading to better outcomes for these kids. That money might be just better spent flat out in resources for the community and to make the lives in these homes better, to provide more opportunity, more training, more education, better access to mental health treatment, better access to drug treatment. I am pretty convinced that that would be a better way of doing it. More jails, prisons, incarceration, more prison, more criminal justice criminal justice sanctions is not going to do it. But it seems like the Sun-Times columnist might be out of fresh ideas other than increase the criminal justice system, increase the power of DCFS, which is like a subsection of the criminal justice system, in my view. So very sad. We're going to keep an eye on that. That is not going to be a long-term solution to the carjacking problem in Chicago. That's for sure. Our next segment talks about it's about the article from the Sun-Times. CPD officer accused of handcuffing man in 2019 charged with official misconduct. And I want to talk about two quotes specifically in this article. Garcia then placed his hands over the man's neck for more than 10 seconds. I think he got in the back seat with him in the car, making it difficult for the man to breathe, prosecutor said. The officer's partner went around the car and got in the other side to remove Garcia's hands, the prosecutor said. Now, as we talked about 2 weeks from Wednesday, having Sarah Stout from the Chicago Council of Lawyers on to talk about reforms that were passed by the General Assembly. This is a reform that needs to be beefed up. Did the Garcia's partner, and this would have been context for the article, was he disciplined for, well, first of all, did he report that Garcia put his hands on this man's neck for no reason? Did he? Did he report it? And if he didn't report it, was he disciplined for it? Because that's meaningful context in this article, right? I know that in the reforms, if an officer turns off his body camera, for instance, on purpose, that's now it could be a class 3 felony. And I also think if they sign a false police report, that can be a class 3 felony. I think we are looking at a prime example of what needs to be included in that, and that is, did this officer fail to report an assault and a battery by a fellow officer? We don't exactly know because Matthew Hendrickson's article doesn't tell us. It would be nice if that kind of context was in this article so we knew. And I'm going to give you one more quote here. Prosecutors later decided to revisit the case. Upon further review of the facts, evidence, and law, we believe we can now meet our burden of proof and move forward with charges, a spokesman with the state's attorney said. Well, what does that mean? Is that BS or what? Like, hello, what was why originally did they decline pressing charges? Why specifically did they decline pressing charges? Did they get new information? Did a new prosecutor come in and look at it? Were they worried about heat? Did Kim Fox intervene? Did a superior intervene? What happened? That is a bogus wordsmithed PR sentence that doesn't mean anything. Upon further review, why did you need further review? Why wasn't the initial review enough? Who did that thought that initial review wasn't enough? We need to know. But Matthew Hendrickson just bought the statement, probably emailed to him, because you're not allowed to ask questions in most of these things anymore. He bought and swallowed that, and that's just a massive, massive failure. Because it's not enough that they're now prosecuting him. Why didn't they prosecute him before, and why are they prosecuting him now? What changed? Upon further review means nothing. It's a crapola statement that he bought and reprinted. When you hear about Stenographers to Power, it was a book by Ben Bardikian? I think it was. Who wrote a book on, I think I have it on my bookshelf, Stenographers to Power. This is a great example. That was a total stenographer. He cut and pasted that right out of the statement they emailed it to him, and it went right into the paper and online story. It's horrible. Horrible. Okay, for our last segment, ladies and gentlemen, we'll just give you a quick update on what's going on with CJP. You can find out all of this stuff on our website. So real quick about our litigation ongoing with the state's attorney. Now, after every hearing, you can go on to our latest updates, and we'll be pinning. We're going to have a running blog that lets you know what's going on in the hearings. We just started publishing that. Basically, we had a hearing I think it was last Thursday, and it's Kim Fox, state's attorney's office, doing their best to waste money fighting our FOIA lawsuits, our Freedom of Information Act lawsuit. They're trying to cover up, deny as best as possible. It aggravated the judge to no end, but they're going to do whatever they can to stall. That was proof enough in our hearing on Thursday. So I think we're going to be giving you hearings updates on our hearings for every couple of months for a couple of years. They are going to, they're just going to piss away a lot of money and lose in the end. It's unfortunate, but you're going to get updates every time there's a hearing. We're going to do the same thing with our ongoing Chicago Police Department litigation. We have a call Thursday with I think a sergeant or lieutenant in the department talking about data related to calls for service. So if you love the department, check this one out. Figure out how this physically works. They owe us 18 years of data around, or I think it's 18 years of data related to police calls for service. The first 9 years, because they maintain data, their data warehouse is collected every year from the 911 Center, Office of Emergency Management and Communications, that actually creates it every day because they take the calls. OEMC, which is the short acronym there, they delete data 4 years to the day. The police department knows it, so they have been for years capturing that data every year so that it doesn't get erased so they can use it for their research purposes. So in our FOIA, we asked for 18 years of that data out of their warehouse, the CPD's warehouse, data warehouse. In the first 9 years of that, they actually gave us about 13% of the calls that the Chicago Police Department annual reports say that OEMC said came in regarding to 911 regarding seeking police services, 13%. Now, that's weird, but the second set of 9 years, they gave us on average 145% of calls. 1 year had a maximum of 198% of the calls. Now, ladies and gentlemen, how do you get 198% of anything? So they were either lying back on your annual reports or someone conjured up some data. They averaged for those 9 years 145% of the calls. I mean, that's just how broken the system is. Couple other quick updates. Look out in the spring, late spring, early summer, with a major set of FOIA litigation coming up against the mayor's office, law department, police department, COPA, the Citizen Office of Police Accountability, and the police board related to our investigation into a wrongful shooting of a black mentally challenged teenager who survived it, thank God. But we're trying to get at the mechanics of how the decision was to suspend him. And all of those agencies have let us down and failed in the responses. We have sent responses to freedom of information requests that we have sent in. And the police board will have more counts added on because we have sent them other FOIAs that they have denied or ignored. So we'll be hitting them. And just real quick, look on our website soon. We have updated or expanded our transparency efforts, and we have started filing FOIA requests. I'm coming to you from the District of Columbia. We have sent in what is going to become pretty much a stock FOIA request as we expand around the country at local jurisdictions, going after metadata on 911 calls and crime incident data, a whole range of issues regarding policing in the District of Columbia. You can go on our website into the latest news to look at those actual FOIA requests. And within the next week or two, we have gotten a response related to 911 calls. The Office of Unified Communications here in DC will be posting what they've responded to us with. And we're still way overdue for a response from the Metropolitan Police Department here in DC. They've had a few things going on with the pandemic and our recent coup attempt. So, but we'll be posting responses and all the data we get to our website for both of those responses. And in the next few weeks, we'll be expanding our FOIAs around the country to other cities. Cities in the news. Columbus, Ohio, the site of a recent shooting of unarmed black and murder of a unarmed black youth for no apparent reason. Louisville, Kentucky, Breonna Taylor's death. South Bend, Indiana, because they have proms, and then a host of other cities. So check back to this show and also on our website at chicagojustice.org if you want more information about it. If you want to participate, become part of the nation, email us at info@chicagojustice.org and we'll hook you up with info about that. We meet every Wednesday night at 7 p.m. Central. We have a bunch of groups with the nation doing crowdsourced research projects for us, recruiting sponsorships for the show, part of the Open Cities Project. We got a lot going on. Email us and we'll set you up. Okay, thank you so much for tuning in. I really appreciate it. We will see you Wednesday back here at 12 to 1 Central, talking about violence prevention and community groups pledge to reduce it by 20% a year over the next 5 years. Thank you so much. We'll see you next week or see you Wednesday.